What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at Mechabellum, which I suppose would be accurately described as a strategy auto-battler, which is a little bit different than the games I normally cover, but when this game had initially released in early access, I thought it looked pretty cool, and just a couple of days ago from the time of this video, it actually launched into its 1.0 release, where they sent me a key over asking if I wanted to take a look at it, and I figured it looked interesting enough, and gave me a little bit of a break from the usual suspects. Now, that said, this is very much so a small indie title. It's on a launch discount for about $10 and normally only costs about $15, and that's because the core, I would say, premise is relatively straightforward. That is to say, we're going to be battling a whole host of different robots against each other via either multiplayer PvP or just throwing them against AI units. And to that end, this is an online game, though you can play solo against AI or even team up with a friend specifically against AI in those kinds of battles. Now, I would say probably the first thing you'd want to do with this particular game is simply run through the tutorials and get the gist of what the game is and how it plays. These are going to explain the basics to you, like the deployment phases, countering enemy robots, etc. Though, essentially, the game takes place in rounds. Each round you're going to set up your basic units, where you'll have a set amount of currency to spend on unlocking and then of course deploying those units, though I believe there's a limit of 2 per round. With every round also giving you the chance to, say, get more units via some various options that will pop up. Now, where it gets much more interesting is that, of course, each of these units has strengths and specialties, but also upgrade trees, technology associated with them. You can also unlock abilities that you can activate to deploy on the battlefield to either help you or hinder the enemy, such as energy shields or fire bombs, alongside single-use items like those energy shields, but also sentry missiles. But taking that a step farther still, every round after the first, you're also able to deploy units on the enemy's flanks and they yours. And then later on, it's also possible to get sort of deployment abilities that allow you to deploy units behind enemy lines, where they can do things like potentially attack the control towers. Both you and your opponent have 2 control towers. If you manage to destroy those, your movement speed and outgoing damage are vastly reduced for a short period of time, which is usually more than enough for the opposite team to capitalize on that advantage. So every round, either via AI or actual people, you're in a sort of guessing match about what your opponent is going to try to do and how you're going to counter what they're trying to do to you, and back and forth. Now, obviously with AI, this is a bit easier as you can more directly see what they're going to do, but then you're up against the sheer number of units you'll be fighting. These units, while varied in just the single types they are, can also be promoted as they make it through rounds, which will of course increase their strength, and then your unlocked technology can also be upgraded and supplied to every unit of that type for that match, which might help you overcome more obvious interplay between the various units. Like, for instance, you have these giant Vulcan enemies that spew flamethrowers out, and they're great against the smaller swarm unit of enemies. But anything with a decent range can usually burst them down, provided of course they don't have some sort of backup means of dealing you damage. Now, another example here directly is that some enemies can only attack other enemies on the ground, and there are flying units which won me one round of a match at one point simply because my opponent had no ability to attack the air left on the battlefield, and all I had was air units. So there's a lot of strategy involved here, a lot of back and forth, and I think that's probably why I enjoy it more than your typical auto-battler, which, let's be honest, tend to be pretty boring. But at least in this instance, that is what piqued my own interest and why I'm taking a look at it in this particular video. Now, that's not all you can do. As you might imagine, you can customize the appearance of all of your individual units, and selling things like little cosmetic options that you can seemingly mostly earn in-game as well, though looks to be how they plan on paying for the servers going forward, so that's something to know. Though I would say honestly the most unfortunate thing about this particular game is just that its Steam Deck rating is only playable, and there's a handful of reasons for that, not least of which is because the very small text on a very small screen being hard to read, but also having to use the on-screen keyboard for many things like setting up your lobbies and whatnot, and some functionality not being fully accessible. But if you're willing to put up with that, then I think something like this is the kind of game that would be great to play on the go, because you can play it in really short bursts while you're, say, waiting for something, but that might be a tad bit difficult, which again is simply unfortunate. And I do think the battles against the AI opponents in solo could probably use a little bit of tweaking, simply because the AI seems to be able to ramp up much more quickly than you can. which leads you to relying on the, I would say, luck of the draw style of things in between various rounds a little more than feels fun. Now, if all of that isn't enough for you, there are actually community challenges you can take on as well. These are effectively like curated encounters that other players have actually sat down and made, and what's cool about these is they even have like a little approval rating associated with them, so you can scroll through and see how much people have liked any given one if you want something a little more akin to like a puzzle element with this particular title. But all in all, I would say Mechabellum is simply a very focused game that does one thing in a very interesting way, and I will say it's basically the only auto battler I've ever seen that actually made me want to kill a little time with it here and there. So that is as good a place as any to wrap up this particular video. I hope you enjoyed it, found it informative. Do let me know what you think about this one down in the comment section below, which naturally means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.